Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel, the one thing Fnatic, TSM and T1 fans can all agree on.
Just like my stream, this video is brought to you thanks to Gamer Subs. So if you want to support me and get 10% off some delicious Gamer Subs, use the code Thorin, THORIN, at gamersubs.gg. Now, Dom has already broken this whole story. If you don't know, he's the first person to bring this information out. He did a video where what he was able to explain was that Cloud9, the top LCS org, has fired Jojopyun, who obviously they only signed this year to make their super team with him and Blabber, who were like the MVPs the last few years in the super talents from NA. And they fired him, not just because like he was underperforming or they wanted to get rid of him. They've actually fired him as in broken his contract for cause, as it's called, which means basically within the contract, like it was labeled that you couldn't or do certain things or you had to do certain things. And you either didn't do the things you were asked to do or you did do things you were told not to do. And essentially they've documented it and they believe that they can just break his contract and that he's done as a result. And I've heard, except here's the thing, he's not exactly just fired. Like I've heard the whole point is now this is why he's not going to play for them anymore and that he's already been offered to LEC orgs and other orgs out there, but I'll get to that later because I've also got some of my own info that I was able to reach out to people and find out. So the premise goes, if you watch Tom's video, this is a key detail. As usual, people get the facts wrong even. People keep saying that the reason Jojopyun was fired, I mean, he's still going to be sold in theory, was because he was late 43 times. Now, actually, that's not what Dom said. If you listen, what Dom said is that once they started documenting when and how many times Jojopyun was late, that he was late 43 times for team meetings, scrims, etc. So actually, it's clearly more than 33. And I would even infer, I don't think they just did this after one or two times. I would just guess, pure speculation on my part, this feels like he did it at least 10 or more times before that. And then as a result, a track record emerged, a precedent was set. For whatever reason we'll get to later, Cloud9 didn't like this. And one of their moves was, well, we'll see. I'll speculate maybe they did something about it, but whether they did or not, start documenting it, get a paper trail so that if later on this comes up and ends up being a massive issue, we can show this guy was late 43 or more times, but we have 43 on the record. So there's that aspect. So what we'll do is we'll break down all aspects of this story as we go, and I'll give a mixture of my thoughts, some behind the scenes info, and some speculation. So first of all, the idea that he was late 43 times. Now, already, this is where wording is really tricky. I know we're not in a court of law. We're just in the court of public opinion. You can choose to believe whoever you want and whatever you want, right? But I am going to treat this as if people were being very specific about their wording. So I actually find that wording quite vague. Like, first of all, notice this isn't actually any kind of a communication from Cloud9. Cloud9 hasn't come out. Jack hasn't come out. The coaching staff of Cloud9 hasn't come out. No one's come out and said, we are getting rid of Jojopyun. He was late 43 times. That's unacceptable to us. You know, that violates our major rules. It's a major thing in the contract. So that's why this is all stuff that's come out via a leak. Now, I do trust the leak. I think that Dom wouldn't make this up. I think that he has real sources that are legit. I'll even speculate later who the sources might be. I would imagine Jack probably is one of them outright, but I'll get to my own reasons. Pure speculation on my part as to why that would be. And what I would say at the outset is this. Immediately, I'd like to know more specifics about the late aspect. Like, for example, how do you count how many times he's late? Is it late for every single incident? As in, like, if I have a scrim block of 5 scrims, is it late if I'm late just for the first one? Does that count for, like, one scrim that I'm late for? Can I miss, like, the first 2 or 3 scrims, and is that still I was late once? Or does that count as 2 or 3 scrims? And by the way, I'm not implying anything. Like, I still think you would have missed 3 scrims. But it's different. If someone says you were late 3 times, and what they mean is you were late at 12, then you were late at 1, and then you were late at 2. For whatever reason. Could be like you were late, you missed all 3, or you were late for 1. Then after the first scrim, you go to the toilet. This might come up later. We're just giving that as a random issue here. And you come back too late. You come back 10 minutes too late. Maybe you're on your phone too much or you start calling someone and then you're late for the second scrim. But if I say to you later, this guy was late 5 times in a week, you might be like, what? Almost every single work day he was late. That's different, right? You see already how that's different to miss 5 scrims or to miss 5 scrim days or to not be there at the beginning of 5 scrim days. Plus, when you say team meetings and scrims, now I don't put team meetings as nothing. But in theory, right, scrim, to be late for a scrim is worse worse than to be late for a team meeting in the sense that you actually delay practice and your teammates practice. To be late for a meeting, it depends what the meeting's about, doesn't it? Like, again, meeting could mean VOD review, theory practice, draft prep, etc., like scouting, what we're going to do. Or it could be anything. It could be like a minor disciplinary issue. Could be just something simple as like we're going to check in and see where everyone's head's at. I don't know what it is. Again, we don't have a lot of specifics on this particular case, you'll notice. So already the wording is a little bit tricky for me because as you're going to see later in this story, a lot of people are taking this to imply like maybe Cloud9 are sort of like being overly harsh with how they're doing this, or they set him up somehow, or they just wanted to count as many infractions so they could fire him and make him look bad in public and make him the scapegoat for their failure to do anything basically of note with a super team this year. You can go into all those aspects, but I'll just start here. Let's just start with the idea that someone is late over 43 times in a very highly paid job where they're actually expected to performance industry to succeed. Because remember, first and foremost, this isn't even like sports. Like in sports, if you're an amazing player, Jojopyun's one of the best, not only native talents, but just talents in the LCS. There's a reason last year he was the MVP. And he has been like, I mean, wasn't he all LCS second team, both splits? Like he is a very good player. But the problem is this. If this was the NFL and he's a guy who just put up like 1,000 receiving yards and like 9 touchdowns, then yeah, you know what? Actually, you will be somewhat forgiven for certain times you might be late or a bit of a diva because you're putting up such insane numbers. How could you not, right? And also the amount of fans you're bringing to the game, the excitement, the wins you're giving the team, all the that's all the case, right? But the problem you always have to remember in esports is, especially in League of Legends, as I pointed out in my video last year about the economics of the LCS, you don't make anywhere close from the players and how they play and the sponsorship that you then are able to activate based on that. You don't make anywhere close to the amount of cost just of the salaries and housing the team and paying the expenses. You actually lose money running your LCS team. And if you're trying to run a really good team or a super team or pay them higher salaries, you're going to lose the most. And so at a minimum in that scenario, you must always understand that if you are Team Liquid, Cloud9, I don't even know if it would apply to FlyQuest because they're a newer org, right? They haven't been the same org that burned through as much money. I think it'd probably just be Cloud9 and Team Liquid right now. I think they're the only teams where, for me, you basically have to perform if you're on these teams. Because you're literally not only one of our marquee games for our org, but we're actually trying to make it so that we're spending loads and we're only spending essentially to buy a title, a final, go to MSI, go to Worlds. If we don't have those things, I can't, first of all, activate sponsors and get anywhere close to the money I need to recoup the costs of running the team. But also, what was the point of all this? I just threw a giant sack of money into a black hole. I got nothing for it. I got absolutely, by all the metrics that matter in NA and the LCS, we got nothing. And if you don't know, the way you tend to even sell sponsorships in NA is the idea that actually the idea of being the American or North American champion is very big. Like, look, in the modern day, you're not going to trick them. Being North American makes you number one, and it's like the MLB or the NBA. It's like, we're the world champs. You're never going to trick them in the modern day that the LCS is worlds. But at the same time, people don't expect, if they're an NA sponsor, that you win worlds. That's not a reasonable expectation. Quite frankly, it wouldn't move the needle in terms of people buying stuff in America anyway to do with you. So as long as you are the top dog in North America, as was the case 15 years ago, that still means a lot to the sponsor. So actually, it's not even just the Worlds one. Going to Worlds matters in the sense that, like, when the Team Good Super Team was out, wasn't Worlds even maybe, was that even the year it was in NA? Actually, that seems mad. It couldn't be, surely, because that's 2022. And I think in 2022 it was in China. I'm not sure about that one. No, it was in LA. That was the year it was in LA because that was when Monty was there. And it was at the SoFi, the Warriors. Okay, that one was in NA. So the bigger issue there for Team Liquid, Super Team not making it that was in NA. So that matters because you want to do the sponsor activations at first of all, the finals, which they didn't get to go to, remember, because they lost EG. And then also you want to be at Worlds. Like, this one's in Europe, so it's not as big a deal for Cloud9. I'd actually argue not making the final of LCS, and especially not winning the LCS, is probably the even bigger deal. And that's the reason you bought this guy, to put yourself over the top and then just be the best team, right? So I just want to start there. If you want to talk about about being unprofessional. I see a lot of like hand waving of this, and like, oh, he's only 19 and he's just young, and besides, what's 1 or 2 minutes? Like, no, I'm sorry. This is a job where not only are there a million people killing themselves to get your job, like not to the extent in Korea and China, obviously, but still, loads of people desperately want your job. It's a performance industry. You have to perform. It's not just about you get paid, but it's cool. We're all just good guys and enjoy your massive, enormous 6-figure salary. Yeah, it's not millions like before. I mean, aren't people speculating the amounts like 750,000? Are we just going to pause a second and just ignore? You're getting paid $750,000 to play mid lane in the fucking LCS. Bro, actually, I at a minimum, before we even get into anything, expect results. It might not literally be your fault. Maybe it could be the jungler's fault or the ADC's fault, the top player, the coach's fault. There's a million people it could be fault for. But when I pay that much for my star mid laner, a former league MVP and a champion himself, I do expect performance. I expect you to be really good. I don't think he was as good as they hoped. Secondly, I expect results. Again, someone's going to be to blame for this because we're Cloud9. So actually, I am going to look at you and ask, did you play well enough? And especially, did you perform in a professional manner, which meant your other teammates were professional and they fell in line and they performed to a high level and there was a good camaraderie around the team and a good atmosphere? Because if I lose, I'm going to certainly look with the super team for like, were there personality conflicts? Was there a lack of morale? Were people just mentally broken? Did they not even believe they could win? Did they not care about the macro issues? Did they not know what the macro issues were? I'm going to be looking at all these aspects. So I do think when you're on an enormous salary in a real job, this is supposed to be a real job. We're not fucking around anymore. This isn't just like, lol, we play for no salary and try to... No, your salary alone is fucking mega bucks, bro. It's enormous. Like, remember, this salary, 750k a year, I don't think people get this. There are like CEOs of like big European companies you probably have heard of that get paid like 400k or 300k. Never mind 750,000 for playing fucking mid lane in League of Legends LCS. What the fuck is that? Then also think about sports teams. Like, these contracts already are at the level like football in Europe was at in like the 90s, for fuck's sake. Like, this is enormous money, and that had way more revenue and way more profit to be made, by the way. Then there's the whole angle that I'm going to have to back into. It's just an obvious one, which is NA is not beating the allegations, guys. This has been the trend in NA the whole time. There's people complaining about, oh, too many games and scrims. Even though, by the way, you're scrimming worse opponents who play worse and aren't even as mentally challenging. We're having to scrim too much. Meanwhile, the Koreans and Chinese are just grinding themselves to oblivion in that fucking practice blender. So you play less. Then when you play, you've heard all those stories about like the culture people who were just crying, oh, he was a bit too mean to me in the review. He's blaming me. Meanwhile, again, you see those documentaries of like Team WE, where the coach is just coming in like, you're all worthless pieces of shit. What the fuck were you doing with that Baron, you idiot? I told you guys not to. And just flaming the fuck out of them and holding their feet to the fire, like just outrageous levels. Then you go back to NA, you hear all these stories about, oh, Dardock was mean, and then, we didn't like the way Feberman communicated, and oh, what the hell, Mithy, oh, he's a bit toxic, and he's just going in on me, and it wasn't just my fault. So already, NA's got this mega bad culture vibe anyway, that you guys don't practice, you don't have the right mindset. You actually care more about the idea people's feelings aren't hurt than actually people improve and get better at the game and figure out their issues and improve on their issues and don't make the same mistakes again. That's what already is the rep of NA. So then you want to add in as well that you guys actually are the sort of idiots that people would imagine if they saw the stereotype that you're all just listening to all that rap music about hustling and grinding. Except here's the thing, you don't hustle and grind. You just try to live the other aspect of that, like ghetto lifestyle of like, oh, I'm making easy money and fuck y'all and y'all can't do anything to me. It's max disrespect. That's actually the swag you're giving off in NA. Is this like weird idea that like you don't need to practice. You should never be criticized. You already make good money. And besides, lol, I'm already making the bag anyway, so who gives a fuck about whether I go to Worlds? All right, old man, stop taking it so serious. Why are you try-harding, bruh? I'm built different, mate. I just fuck around and practice half as much. I'm not one of those try-hards. I'm just sick at the game, bro. It's fucking chill for me. Little bro fixes on the team. It's all that shit, isn't it? That's part of what this is going to make people think of, because remember, Jojo's really young. He's like 19, 20 years old. Came in the league when he was like 17 and knew obviously fuck all about league and nothing about competing in esports. But didn't he come from bloody Fortnite or something stupid? So you do look at that aspect. This is a terrible look. Because as I pointed out in my video before, by the way, this is supposed to be, after Doublelift, your next, like, chosen one. Like, if Doublelift was the chosen one of LCS, then Jojo a la Sidney Crosby to fucking Wayne Gretzky supposed to be the next one, isn't he? He's the next super talent, mega, like, could be one of the great players who's a pure native NA player. This guy's supposed to be the one you're loading all your hopes and dreams into. But you know what? You've got another fucking one in your fucked up legacy of the Skywalkers of LCS. Oh, you've got the same fucking family curse. Because remember, Doublelift was someone who could be known to be someone who, I mean, literally in CLG, they just played like fucking Street Fighter and Diablo instead of playing League in the first years of the LCS. Then there was times where, did he ever put in the max hours on solo queue? Certainly, sometimes phoned in some regular splits, then just got it together in the playoffs. He definitely had his issue with teammates. I'd imagine he crushed morale 50 million times, especially the first four. The same things keep showing up over and over and over and over again. Meanwhile, contrast those two, Doublelift and Jojopyun, with like, who were the two GO NA LCS players, in LEC players in terms of like European types, Caps and Perks. By the way, in their own way, like the most diligent players ever, the players that like bring up the morale of the team, the players people desperately want to play with. I have no idea if they're late and all that jazz. Things seem to run a little bit differently in Europe. By the way, neither of them probably even being paid as much as Blabber has in his career, I would guess. Maybe Perks, because he had that year on Cloud9 and then he had the Vitality deal. But you look at the rest of their careers, they might have even been paid less than the NA one. I imagine Doublelift's had way more than all of them. Doublelift alone, by the way, probably has the salaries of the others combined. That's how fucking crazy his career was. And he was there in the heyday of LCS, wasn't he? So, as well as that, I want to bring up this aspect people keep referencing, which is this notion that, like, 43 times, you'll see this later, it's like a Kelsey Moser point. The idea of, like, or maybe a Peter Dunn point. I've got all the tweets, don't worry. It's the idea that, like, oh, if he was benched 43 times, that shows it's Cloud9's fault. And the angle goes, look, if you bench him 3 or 5 times, if he's late 3 or 5 times, then yeah, that just implies, you know what, maybe he's just late. Okay, that's his fault, isn't it? You know, fool me once, shame on you. But then what does the saying go? Fool me twice, shame on me. So the premise then goes, if he was late 43 times, why wasn't anything done about it? Why wasn't he benched? Why didn't you just punish him in some way? Why wasn't something done that would prevent him from being late? Like, first of all, I think that's a really disingenuous point in this sense. I agree they should have done something about it. Now, I don't know why people are saying it that way, because are they implying like they know that nothing was done within Cloud9? Did they never have a meeting with him? Did they never sit down with him? Was he never told at some point, look, you've already been late 15 times. By the way, this is something in your contract we consider like an actual like deliverable on your end. And if you are late over a certain amount of times, we'll actually take steps against you. Now, with that said, at the same time, I don't know how you would have that conversation, depending on when in the split a lot of this was happening. Like, as you're starting to lose playoff series, are you really going to have the guy come in and go, look, if you actually lose this next playoff series, which no one thinks you will, to 100 Thieves, then actually, I mean, the problem with that one is you'd already be out anyway, wouldn't you, in a failed Worlds? But you wouldn't tell them, like, oh, but if you fail the next one, then we'll bench you. Also, would you really bench someone? I mean, that's actually the part I want to get into really quickly here that I don't think is actually a fair point to make, is when people say just bench him. Because look, if we go and look at the LCS, this is the summer season. So remember, Cloud9 lost one match in the whole summer. You can see here they went 6-1. There's only 8 teams in the league because that's what a clown show LCS is. And the format is a round robin, one phase of round robin where you play each team in a best of 3. Now, the crucial thing to note here is this, is Cloud9's loss came on week 6 and there are only 7 weeks in the split. And even then it came on the Sunday. So basically, you'd already had like the better part of 2 months before you ever lost. And then the loss you had was in 3 games, so you already could believe you could win that. And it was against Team Liquid, the de facto best LCS team, the champions of the previous split, the team that actually looked good at MSI, the team that looked really good at EWC, and has themselves, by the way, they went undefeated themselves because they won this game. And then also, because you're Cloud9, that's okay to lose to Team Liquid. That's even acceptable. That's the one that's plausible. As long as you come back and then you get to the finals, you play them, you maybe win against them in the finals, and you go to Worlds. As long as you're in the top 3 and you go to Worlds, who cares, right? So you go down. If you're winning and you're undefeated every single week, so look at this, 5 weeks in a row you're undefeated. Even if he's late, are you really going to bench him and then lose the games? By the way, miss me with all that shit where everyone going, this is where having an NACL team with academy players would be good. One, you guys just cherry pick when the academy players do well. When people bring up an academy player and they do worse and they lose the games, and they either have to go crawling back a la Dardoch in Team Liquid 2016 to the guys who are like the fucking toxic person and go, please come back so we can win. You ignore those ones. And then secondly, do you know how many times the academy player comes in and you either go to Worlds and just completely toss it down the drain like Rajcula in 100 Thieves in 2018, or you just don't even go to Worlds and you just blow it completely and actually subbing the player in just ruined the entire team squad. If you paid for this super team on your last year of it being mega bucks for teams, and we'll get to that later, obviously now the budgets are going to be reduced, we imagine, so you won't even want to do these contracts anymore, then would you really bench him at that point? Again, this is the interesting detail. I give massive props, if you remember, to Striker from BDS, when the winter split, in theory, the least important split for BDS, he benched Adam before a playoff series, which his team then lost 3-2, and that actually meant they didn't get to go. They probably should have been in the final, or at least top three. They finished like fourth that split as a result, because if you remember, Mad Lions went to the final, and then Fnatic was, I think, third place that time. So at the time, everyone was praising Striker, like, wow, what a bold move. Like, he knew Adam, who was the guy who was causing issues and had a bad attitude, apparently behind the scenes. He knew, like, he had to just, like, nip this in the bud now and say, I'm not going to accept this. I'm actually going to bench you and show you what happens if you, like, misbehave, and that if you want to get back in the team, you got to do what I say. Now, that all sounds brilliant, guys. If, one, you'd actually won the series. If you'd have won the series, you'd have been a genius. You'd not only made the disciplinary point, you'd have shown Adam the team's bigger than you, and you'd have won the playoff series. It wouldn't have cost you results-wise, right? But do you know what ended up happening, guys? I mean, if you followed LEC, you do, but I'll just give you the punchline. We'll skip to the good part, which is, at the end of the year, BDS was the team who missed out by one spot on going to Worlds. And if you go back and you look, it's now aged very poorly that you didn't play Adam in that split, because it actually turned out, look, you probably should have been in the final every split if you were BDS, but you really could have been in the final of that split. Like, Fnatic hadn't got it together yet. You could even, I won't say you could have won the split. There's a chance, but it would have been an outside chance, because we all know BDS and people like Nuke just play particularly bad against G2 for some bizarre reason. So there is that aspect. So I think already that's an example over in Europe where maybe actually it wasn't the right move to bench the guy. Again, the question is, are we just going for the overall, like, teaching young men, being a leader of an org, setting a team culture? If you want to do all that stuff, yeah, you bench the person. You say, I will not accept these things. And because I won't accept them, I've just said it there, I will make sure this doesn't happen. You will not play. You will not be in the building. You will lose some of your salary. You'll be fined. You will be replaced. You will be on the outs. I can do all that stuff. Or is the most important thing the result? Because I'll just say later on, I mean, we'll get to this in a minute. Later on, you will see that there are some people, Koreans especially, where it's more about the result. They care more about actually, like, do you win the games? Do you get there? Yeah, there's the odd example, like famously the Shy in IG at Season 8 Worlds, where Kim still benched him anyway because he was fucking around and like locked in the Fiora when he was told to pick, like, I can't remember, Nar or something stupid, or something ridiculous. And then they benched him in a playoff game and then lost the next game and then brought him back for game 5 and won the series. Yeah, that happens occasionally. And I'm certain, by the way, if you were late this many times in Korea, you'd never even get to 43. I'd be amazed if you could even get to 5 and be late this many times before you get fucked in Korea. Then I'm just going to put this out there. When it comes to the idea of being late, let's just put this on the table a second. People are doing the thing they do again, where they self-insert themselves as Jojopyun, and they think of scenarios in their life. Maybe they work a low-income job, and it's like going to Subway or something, or just going to an office, or maybe they're at school or in higher education, and they just go, I was only a minute late to the lecture, though. You hadn't even started talking when I got there. I was only 5 minutes late. Like, sorry, miss, I'll just take my seat quickly. You're all thinking this is a low-stakes environment where, is it really that big a deal if you're slightly late by 1 minute? Aren't they being a bit petty there? Aren't they being, like, kind of a bit harsh? Aren't they just, like, going out their way to make you feel bad? No. First of all, this is not only you're playing for, like, an enormous contract in a fucking video game and you're not even 20. Like, that's something to be grateful for, to cherish. I understand folly of youth. You're young and inexperienced. You might not get it. And also people are blowing up your ego. Oh, you're fucking sick, bro. You're an MVP. You're a champion. Oh, you're in a fucking super team. You've got mechanics and yeah, sure, there's all that. But I'll just put this out there. Like, you do know there might be some other way Jack/Cloud9 could have like scapegoated or gotten Jojo out of there. There could have been some other contract thing he didn't fulfill. But you absolutely played into their fucking hands in this scenario, although we'll get later to whether or not there's like a health issue. Because if you already know that they're charting how many times you're late, let's say in the past you've even been fined for this, then if you continue being late, how are you going to complain later? Like, yeah, well, I mean, I guess I was late and I knew I was being late and I knew I had to be on time. But yeah, I was late over 40 times, maybe 50 plus, Thorin. Like, hey, what do you want me to do? Like, that's rank unprofessionalism. And if you're the highest paid player, look, you're not the most experienced, but I am paying you. I'm saying to everyone when I pay you the most, by the way, I'm building this team around you. You're my guy. I'm hitching my wagon and my org's financial success to you and how you play and how you operate as a professional and what results you get me. So that does send a message actually to all the other people in my org. Remember, we've just had to fire Fudge, who by all accounts seemed like a cool person and a glue guy for the team and had a very positive attitude and a very sacrificial attitude in game, because we're saying he wasn't good enough, we weren't getting the results, and at the end of the day, I'll even fire people I like if I have to. It's even inferred they might be getting rid of bloody Blabber because of this, because he just hasn't had the results the last few years that you'd expect from like the NA GOAT, etc., or the greatest jungler to ever play Nelson, whatever people call him nowadays. So I do think that is mental, because let me just put it this way, guys. All he had to do was be 5 minutes late for every meeting and scrim. If he did that, then Cloud9 could not say this, or they'd be lying. So Jojopyun had the power at any point to take this away from Cloud9, make it impossible for them to get this infraction. Now, I'm going to bring this up very briefly. This is going to be someone who was in a very different life situation. But I'll just say this. Let's just say that if you know that story I broke about how XL tried to get rid of some of their giant contracts with certain players or even coaches like Youngbuck, they were trying to get people like him and Targamas and others to just basically just let their contract end and receive either like a small payout, and it was small, or just basically say like, hey, you know, like we've just ended your contract and here's like a couple of reasons why. And basically, I'll just tell you right now, at least one of those individuals was very smart. And what they actually did was they jumped through every hoop set for them by the XL org. So even if it was annoying ass shit, like do a report that, you know, no one cares about and is going straight into a cycle bin after this, or it's just basically busy work for you to waste your time, every little loophole that was put out, not loophole, every little hoop put before this guy, he said, you know what, fuck it, I'll do it. And he fulfilled every deliverable, and it meant that actually he didn't end up losing loads of his money. He was able to get that contract paid out, and essentially he won that one. He used a lawyer, he followed all the rules, and he was able to win that one. Now, Jojo, it doesn't sound to me like he's in a position to do that. Now, we'll get to the illness thing. That would be a bigger issue, wouldn't it, if he was ill, and that meant that's why he couldn't play. So we can get to that in a minute. But I do think that's an aspect people are ignoring. Like, if you're cool with the idea of like, yeah, we're just a few minutes late every single time. Like, no, because you know the reason why? Look, I'm not going to go as far as the Germans. If you don't know, in Germany, apparently they have some mad saying that's like, you know, if you're on time, you're late. If you're like late by 5 minutes, you're actually late by like 10 minutes. And if you're like 5 minutes early, you're on time or whatever. I sort of do get the gist of what they mean. I do think it's mental, the idea you ever have to be there before the time. But what they mean is, most people when they say I'm here, actually mean I'm slightly late. Like I'm 1 or 2 minutes late, but what's the big deal? Well, that is a big deal. Not only do I lose 1 or 2 minutes every single hour that we do one of these meetings that you're late, so it's less time to talk, Sarah. But it's not like the second you arrive, you're activated listening and you're hearing what's going on, understand the context, settled, ready. You're not. Like you might take 10, 15 minutes more. You're disrupting it more now. Now also, it means other people who are there on time not only aren't like rewarded for that, they don't get to start on time, but also they themselves are going to think, why do I have to be on time if he's not on time? And also, if he's still setting up, maybe I'm still doing something on my phone. I'll just send one last tweet, just going to finish call. Yeah, 1 minute. He's not even ready, so 1 minute. Like that spreads in a team. That is infectious when you have that approach. Like I do think that is a major issue. We can't just hand wave that and go, that's no big deal, is it? He was only late a little bit. So he doesn't get results. Maybe it's possible we're looking at, maybe he doesn't even practice as much. He's late all the time. Bro, like, are you guys actually like little kids or something? Do you think these guys are just obliged by Cloud9? Cloud9 is obliged to just pay these people like $700,000 for nothing. Don't win the games. Don't turn up on time. Don't even practice as much. What am I paying for at the end? Like, at the end, what am I paying for? I'm so sick of this. I said this on the LCS, economics video. Why are we acting like Jack is the one, like, skimming all the money off the top and making bazillions like he's Don King? And in this scenario, Jojopyun's some fighter that barely gets any of the fucking money and does all the work, and he's the one that's mistreated. In that analogy, it sounds to me like Jack's mistreated. It sounds to me like Cloud9's fucking mistreated, mate. They've been sold a false bill of goods. They didn't get what they asked for. They want a professional player, the highest paid player, to bring, I assume, the highest level of professionalism and hopefully the highest level of results too. Like, let's actually fucking win. Let's go to Worlds, for fuck's sake. So there's a lot we can actually get into on this topic. There's so many different things. Also, by the way, let's just put this out there. It's not like he's a nobody and you can just bench him. He's a champion in the past years. He's an MVP in the past years. He was literally voted the second best mid laner, both splits. The entire league's telling you can't bench this guy. Your team will just be way worse. And also, if it's just something he habitually does, is he actually going to mature within a week or two? Is that all that stuff of like, oh, but Cloud9 were geniuses when Reaper benched Jensen and all those people back in, everyone except Licorice, back in Season 8 summer. Yeah, that's because it worked out. That's because the results worked out. That's because they went to Worlds and the end result, the happy ending, was fucking awesome. Tell you what, if they didn't even get to the finals of that summer, and then they didn't even make it to Worlds, or they got busted in the plane, like almost happened, by the way, you wouldn't think that was as cool a story. I think actually if they lost to... Were they the ones that were playing Gambit? I think they were. If they lost to Gambit in that best of 5, I actually think in that scenario, we're all looking back like, what the fuck was Reaper thinking? And actually, you know what? Maybe Jensen should leave just because they bloody benched him and they was doing that stupid shit with Svenskeren and Blabber and what the fuck was going on. Actually, I think people would retcon that story very, very differently. And then also, the other reason you don't bench him is he's your star signing. This is the player you brought to actually like win the league this time and win everything. So... I think, lastly, I'll just say this detail before we get into some of the other aspects of the story. I also think it's way less forgivable that him being late because this is a super team. I'm pushing the boat out here. I don't have to. I could min-max in LCS, but I'm pushing the boat out to try and have a really good squad. They can't just win the LCS. That's my minimum. I want to fucking go top 4 at Worlds, or I want to be in the final of MSI or something crazy. That's what I'm building this team for. And you're the new guy. If you're the new guy, you better A, fit our culture and do your best to fit in. And then B, since I'm paying you the most, be a leader. Lead by example. You don't have to be a leader in terms of personality, but be a leader by being professional, being on time, practicing the most, playing the hardest, keeping people's morale up if you can. We're building around you. If we're building around you, that means hopefully you're going to be a mainstay for years to come. So set the standard. Understand that in our org, this isn't EG. We're not loosey-goosey. We have certain things we want done in a certain way. You know the stories in the past. I mean, you fucking played with people like Vulcan, what they never told you what it was like when LS was around, or you haven't talked to Fudge and asked what happened. What did go wrong in those squads, and why was Summit? Why did he have to leave, and why did they bench Sven and then kick him out? You never asked about any of these players. You never bothered to... Mate, you just don't sound curious. You don't sound like you really care about this gig. Also, it's implied there was a bidding war on this player. Like, you potentially had to pay even more than you wanted to get him. And then he's what? We're being told, based on like Blabber's comment on Sackdown, that he's the highest paid player in the league. Haven't I just given you like a million reasons there as to why like it's totally legit that Jack or Cloud9 would be upset? And then, as I said before, what are the metrics that we care about in terms of results? LCS titles, we got none. LCS finals, we got none. International tournaments, we got none, and fucking 2 teams go to MSI nowadays. We even had 2 teams go to bloody EWC. We couldn't go there because he didn't get the MSI invite. So there was 3 international tournaments this year, and we've gone to none of them as Cloud9. And I'm paying you the most money in the league. For what? For what? So we're going to get into a bunch of the other stuff, but I want to quickly comment on Jack/Cloud9, because I'm going to actually speculate. I get the feeling some of this, let's just say via whatever methods it was leaked, I think some of it does come from Jack. As in, I would speculate that Jack is actually happy that this information is out there and that he does want people to know that Jojopyun behaved this way, and as a result, that's why he was fired. I don't think Jack does want it, as Cloud9 the orgs showing, that we're just going to quietly offer him to other orgs, move his contract, sign someone else for less money next year, presumably, and then move on from in the team, and it didn't work out. We can't have... I mean, I agree with this, by the way. As actual analysis, this is one of the most gross things about this whole thing. Everyone's acting like they're Jojopyun's fucking mom or best friend, and they're not even looking at it as a sport Esports team. Like, let's just be real, straight up. As an analyst of League of Legends, I've watched lots of League of Legends over the years. I wouldn't say claim to be an expert on the level of people like Dom, Monty, LS, etc. But I tell you what, I've watched a lot of League of Legends. I know a lot about esports. I would say this. It was obvious to me after summer you had to pick one of the two. You had to pick either Jojo or Blabber, and whichever one you picked, you probably needed to move the other one on. I mean, we've already seen they're just better with other people. Like, Blabber was way better with Niski. You could even say he was better with Fudge. I think that fucking Inspired with Jojo was obviously the combo. He never looked as good without him, even though individually he was mega. He just never had the macro ability, and Blabber never had that to begin with. Yeah, he could do the whole thing of like, what if they roll swap someone, or what if they got a support that could shotgun? That's all great and everything. But first of all, we already just spent time getting bloody Vulcan back into the team and trying to make that bot lane with Berserker, didn't we? So I think you should have moved on from one of them anyway. It's maybe even implied they might move on from both, by the way. So already, I think that's an aspect you have to put out there. So one of my issues is this. I do think that part of this is a knock-on effect from past instances. I think this isn't actually the craziest shit in Cloud9. I think it is the straw that broke our speculate Jack's back. And what I mean by that is this. I think he's just so sick and tired of having to eat a plate of shit so he can be the nice guy owner. There's a reason why very few people leave the Cloud9 org and trash talk Jack or the Cloud9 org. Very few. And they're basically only the people that were fired or feel like they were unfairly moved on, you'll notice. Aside from that, actually, they have a very good reputation as an org. And one of the reasons why is, I'll just say it right now, I think Jack and the org have tagged the aggro so many times. Like, you might think because of the things I hinted at about LS leaving or Summit leaving, etc., you might, or them benching Sven and bringing King in. You might think like, oh no, like they're not happy with things. Like, yeah, but they don't ever say that. Have you noticed that? They're not the ones that are putting that info out there. So my thing is, I think you look at past issues, and one, as an actual org owner, I mean, I've told him this privately and publicly, but I do think for the first like 3 or 4 years of being at LCS, so we're talking 2013 to like 2016, 2017, I do think Jack was a little bit too much of a pussy. Like, I think he was a little bit too conservative, or more importantly, I think he was too sentimental. I think he had too many personal relationships, especially with the original 5-man lineup. That's why he kept bringing people like Meteos and I back a million times over. He stuck with Sneaky for way too long. I think he stuck with Balls a little bit too long. I think he actually should have brought in like a more heavy coaching early on, but he kind of just trusted people like I could run the team and Elimination, all that jazz. Then I do think later on, he was even too kind at waiting around on some of the people when he brought up academy players that were good. And now, look, I do think he eventually turned that into a very clever angle where he was quite ruthless at selling them almost at their peak like a shit coin. And then when they were crap afterwards, well, it's not his fault. They were really good when he sold them and looked good in his system, and then they didn't look as good elsewhere, did they? Certain supports, jungles, etc. You know who I'm talking about. Mid laners, maybe. But I would also say, then you add in the whole LS situation where LS joined, giant name, the whole fucking like hopes and dreams of the fans are built into the idea he's going to bring this revolutionary shit. He does a few games of it to hint at it. All of a sudden he leaves unceremoniously fired. It's never publicly said why, but it's just the whole thing of like the systems are hinted at. And then you have this whole thing where LS sort of like says a few things himself, but doesn't ever come out himself. There's that one that people are very unhappy about, even though, by the way, you still end up being a good team. And actually you even won. Let me think. Yes, you won that year with Jensen when he came back in. They had the Summit thing. He was the fucking MVP of the league and looked really sick. By the way, he just was a really skilled top laner. He just had a massive ego and probably should only play in the LPL. There's a reason why when he went to Team Liquid, he was on their few win conditions where they actually could have beaten the D1s of the world because they had Summit. Like, he was really good, wasn't he? But he seemed like a massive diva and he didn't fit the Cloud9 sort of culture fit. And then he basically just left. Like, it just was over. I think after eating that many plates of shit, that if you're Jack, you would just say, you know what? Not again. This time, actually, this little fucking brat that I paid the world to while everyone else is leaving the league for $6 million, and I'm saying I'll pay you $750K, allegedly, to play mid lane for me. You know what? At a minimum, you can fucking turn up. Do you know what it's like to work a job and get paid $20K and pay all your taxes and all the insurance pay? Like, how about just turn up to your fucking job? You haven't got the results anyway. My team's failed. My super team's failed. I'm getting absolutely nothing. By the way, I used to think, this is why if I'm Jack, I'm speaking as here, this is why I just fired Mithy. This is why I just fired Fudge. Because I thought just winning a split and going international not doing anything was bad. The idea of not even making a single title, a single final, or any international title, that's untenable for me. I'm Cloud9, motherfucker. We don't miss worlds. That's not what we do here. We don't do that here. Like, that's what I expect fucking Jack's vibe was. So I don't really blame blame him on this one. By the way, the TSMs of the world would like this 50 times over through the usual suspects, where it'd be obvious who did it. Or if this was in Europe again, the story would come out through certain shitter Pokemon, and then you'd note it, say, oh, fuck this player. Wow, he thinks he can get away with that behaviour, did he? So I think this is not as actually like not even that bad a thing that they're doing. Obviously, the main thing is the whole health thing, which we'll get to in a minute. Then there's the whole thing that, like, would they have cut him anyway, even if they'd have made Worlds? I think it's way less likely if they make Worlds. Like I said earlier, I actually think if they'd have just won an LCS split, that already might have, maybe it wouldn't have been enough because that was the old standard. I do think that might have meant that they wouldn't have leaked this info, though. If they'd have won an LCS split and made it to MSI and Worlds and done nothing, I still think that might have been enough to just mean that, like, you quietly move them on, etc. I think the fact that, that you failed all expectations, I do think that's a big part of why you now want a scapegoat, because even in past years, like when you failed with Iski and Blabber, you still did win the spring split in dominant fashion. There was no MSI. You didn't have a chance to prove yourself, and it was the online Likoof era, so no one really blames you that much. I do think this time around, people would laugh at you, especially because it wasn't even Team Liquid and FlyQuest that beat you. It was 100 Thieves. And when 100 Thieves puts you out like that in laughable fashion with a lineup that on paper shouldn't be going to Worlds, at that point you've absolutely failed. It wasn't even like FlyQuest that got it together and Inspired looks amazing and the quad gamble worked out. Team Liquid's got the best macro and the best cut. No, it's not that stuff. Then let's add in, here's a detail people forget. Wasn't it implied by Monty or Dom, I think it was Monty, that part of how they got Jojopyun, because remember everyone's cut like budgets across the LCS, was they had to fire some coaching staff. Well, wait a minute. If I fired some coaching staff to get you in the team, to make this a super team, you were motivated to come and play with us, etc., and want to be in the best team, then I haven't got the extra coaching staff to babysit you. I haven't got extra people to just assign to you to make sure you bloody, I don't know, wake up on time, come in on time, say you're going to be a minute late, come out of the toilet after 5 minutes instead of after fucking 25 minutes, whatever it might be. Maybe I haven't got them. Maybe I just already invested those resources into you and your fucking actual base salary. Keyword base salary. It's not even like, by the way, you're going to get that money if we make Worlds or when the LCS. You're just getting that money. You're just getting the better part of $1 million, just returning up late and then losing games in the LCS and coming fourth. That's what I'm paying you that money for. I think people are being really uncharitable towards Cloud9 here. Funny, they can understand like how annoyed you'd be if someone was like, fucking mean or scapegoated you or revealed info about you. But they can't understand how mean it would be for someone to get $700,000+ and give you zero fucking meaningful results and then go, lol, I'm spending this. And you have to go, oh, well, fuck me, I guess. And then people go, well, you're only 19. So then you're arguing he shouldn't have a professional job by that logic. He can't do the basics of the job. So I think it's mental. Then there's the whole thing of the idea, that was it, the idea that they'd cut him anyway if they made Worlds. I don't think so personally. I think even if they had have cut him, that would mainly be because of the stipend thing, which we can get to now. On the Team Liquid one, the Team Liquid Super Team was different. That was even more money. It was like $7 million, like millions to Bjergs alone. And that one did fuck up their sponsor deliverables. They were supposed to be at the LCS finals and then at Worlds to do massive deliverables. I won't say which companies, but you could probably guess which ones for in the Team Liquid network, one of the biggest orgs in the world, like Cloud9, like a G2. Then there is the whole thing about his contract, which is just unfortunately the problem with Esports Winter. Didn't I tell you all in that fucking LCS walkout video? Watch out. You're all fucking playing with fire here and you're picking the worst time and the worst people ever to play a game of chicken with. Because actually these people, some of them want to leave the league. And if you make it harder for them and more expensive for them and more of an arse on for them and less of an upside when there already barely is one, they're just going to leave and they're going to go to Valorant and they're going to go to CS2 and they're going to go to Rocket League and whatever. I mean, they're already there, but they're going to focus on these games instead of League of Legends. So the issue goes that the rumor is, just like in Valorant, supposedly Riot's slashing like the amount of like digital goods / sales, like whatever, or revenue share that they give to the VCT, the top Valorant teams that are in their partnership program. Similarly, obviously it's Riot, still the same company. Supposedly Riot's going to bring down the amount of stipend that you get, the amount of money, the rev share that you get, I assume is the premise. Maybe it's a stipend for the orgs in the LCS. And as I pointed out in the past already, no one was making more than a couple of million from Riot in the good years. And everyone was spending and losing, like most teams losing more than $1 million a year running their LCS team. Losing it. Not like they spend $1 million and then, no, they're losing $1 million. When they're doing tiny salaries, just not getting that much out, doing huge ones, still losing no matter what they get back from sponsors. Everyone's losing money. That's why you saw actually reasonably sized orgs leave the LCS. That's why it's 2 less teams, and there's going to be even less teams, apparently. So if orgs are leaving, and more importantly, orgs are going to get less money, then yeah, you're going to have to slash your budgets further if you're the Cloud9s in the world, especially if you didn't just get to deliver on a bunch of sponsor shit. Especially if that part failed for this year, didn't pay for this year's team, it's definitely not going to pay for next year's team, which is going to get even less revenue because you're going to get less from Riot. In that world, if you're Jack, maybe you already had to look at downsizing this contract. Maybe already you might have used the 43 late times and just gone to Jojo in the offseason and said, look, right, I'm gonna give you a deal here. I either shop you and send you elsewhere, and by the way, I've got you on record 43 times late, or how about this? Since I've shown you didn't really put in your best effort and you were late and you didn't meet my professional requirements, how about this? I'll give you a new contract, but instead of 750k, I'm making this up here, obviously. It's half that. It's 350k, it's 400k, but you still play with the same lineup. We won't tell anyone, the public, what happened with being late, etc. And we'll just run it back and we'll say, you know what? Maybe we both had exaggerated expectations, and we've seen now with the state of the league that it's not like another org could pay you 700, 600, 500k anyway. So why not just stay put and do that deal? Maybe that's what happens if they make Worlds or they win an LCS title and make MSI, etc. But they failed on every single metric. Every one, guys. They didn't make a final. Never mind a title. They didn't make any international tournaments. Like, I think it's totally legitimate to want out of this contract and say, fuck this deal. I mentioned this point on Summoning Insight, but this reminds me of a story, which I think a lot of you don't get the spirit of the story, which is I told this story back on Summoning Insight about when Kobe Bryant was in the last year of his career before he had the Achilles injury, right? Which was obviously the one where it was in 2012 to 2013. That was when the NBA had implemented like an amnesty rule where you could sort of pick one bad contract and you could essentially sort of agree, like, I'm just going to say like this contract didn't happen, basically. You could sort of have like, I think it was something like you could have the equivalent of like a mulligan, or you could break the contract in some way. But I think you could only do it with like one contract, essentially. To me, it was like the NBA's version of trying to get around some of the issues that you have in the NFL, where in the NFL, they just make it not guaranteed money, don't they? So then if the running back who's really good, but a little bit sus with injuries, gets injured next year, he just doesn't get the money because it's not guaranteed money. Whereas the problem with the NBA is famously focused like Gilbert Arenas, got enormous contracts, then got mega injured and were never that good again. And there were teams years later, while he was sat on the bench sometimes, just paying this guy $20 million a year. And it was ruining the salary cap for a bunch of orgs. So to me, this was like they were trying to offer to the NBA, like, look, you guys already, I mean, it's too late. We can't go back over the Rubicon. You've already given them all guaranteed money. So we can't go to an NFL system. But maybe if you have one giant contract that's just going to be an albatross around your neck, a millstone dragging you down, maybe you can cancel that contract and say, I'm going to amnesty this one and move on. Now, the reason why this is an interesting little side note is I'm a massive Kobe Bryant fan. I even think it's legitimate. Someone could say he's the GOAT player in the NBA. He's not my GOAT. My GOAT would be Michael Jordan. But I think he's certainly like a top 2, top 3 player of all time. He's a fucking phenomenal player. At the time, by the way, he was still at a level where he could have won championships. Obviously, he could potentially have won that year if he hadn't have had the Achilles injury. If they'd have ever gotten the Chris Paul deal 2 seasons earlier, I think he could have won. If he hadn't have had an injury at all, I think he could have had a couple more years where he'd have been capable of winning, but he wasn't at his absolute peak in his prime, etc. So you might think, well, why would I ever support the idea he could amnesty him? Because it was about business, not about what you feel about Kobe Bryant. So what happened was Mark Cuban, the billionaire owner of the Mavericks, pointed out that the Lakers, I think he just said something like they should probably consider like amnestying Kobe's contract. Because his point was, at the time, Kobe, if you remember, because of the Shaq deal and his rookie contract early on and being benched in the first few years, a lot of years of his career, he hadn't been paid the most in the NBA. It's only actually once Shaq left and then he started signing big deals after that he got the giant deals, and at the very end, he got a really big deal when they re-upped after the championships. I think it was after 2011 or something. And he got like the max contract. He got like the 30 mil plus a year. And the problem is you could see his level incrementally is going down. Let's say every year he's getting 3% worse, 5% worse, but his contract's getting bigger and it's actually about to hit the not sweet spot where you're going to start going down more, but your contract's the max. And as it goes down, your contract just stays up here. So the problem Mark Cuban was making was, if the Lakers actually don't think their team can win the championship this season or next, they should actually look at amnestying this contract. Because, by the way, 2 things. 1, you could do the same thing. You could sign a smaller contract with them and say, this just doesn't work for us, but we want you to play for the team. And 2, by actually amnestying that contract or getting rid of him, you could actually potentially build a better squad because he's taken up so much of your cap. So when the Kobe then won that regular season game and then did that tweet like amnesty that, Like, that's cool in a shonen manga anime, or like if you're a little kid, that seems cool. I mean, sentimentally, it's cool. It's sort of the perfect fodder for a post-game interview, a book of anecdotes, a documentary. If you'd have gone on and won the championship that year, you'd have beaten the Mavs and the Plus. Wouldn't that be a cool anecdote, right? Do you know the only problem with that scenario is? As a Kobe fan, I'll tell you, Mark Cuban didn't say anything wrong. Like, he actually just presented a very reasonable business point. It's just that in sentimental reasons, the Lakers were never going to cut Kobe. He is the Laker. Secondly, he just brought them a bunch of championships when he stuck around and stayed to be built around instead of going to the Chicago Bulls in 2007, 2008, off-season or whatever it was. So, like, for sentimental reasons and for sunken cost fallacy, you never were going to actually bench or fire him. Now, let's just put this out there. Let's be real. Jojopyun is not the fucking Kobe Bryant of Cloud9. You could argue maybe Blabber is. I'd say it's more berserker the last few years, actually. He's the one that hard carried them a lot of the years. But a lot of people thought Blabber was excellent. He won the MVP a lot of times. You built around him for what? Like the last, I mean, at this point in time, we're talking about the last 5 years. Yeah, last 5 years, because season 9, they were still bringing Sven Skjeren in. Yeah, last 5 years or so, you've built around this guy. That's your Kobe Bryant. If you let that guy go, it's a bigger deal. Jojo's only been here a year. Like, that's not even that big a deal. So I already think people are being really silly with the idea like it's unacceptable to consider like removing this guy or benching this guy. Also, by the way, I'll just put this out there as a very quick shitty thing on the side. All the people who just go, just sign NA talent, how's that working out for you? I'll tell you what, you know when you sign that Korean that you've never heard of? First of all, that Korean sometimes turns out to be pretty good, like Quad or Quid, right? They're pretty good players. One was an MVP last split, one was in the finals this split and won the fucking championship, right? Those players, I'm going to go ahead and say, won't be late 43 times plus. If you tell them be here at 9:01, I think they'll be there at 9:00. If you tell them be at 9:00, I think they'll be there at 8:55. That's just my take. Koreans tend to be very diligent, and they understand, by the way, if they're getting paid a giant LCS salary compared to what they used to get on some shitter no-name challenger team or on the bench on some LCK team at the bottom of LCK. They know, like, this is my fucking chance, mate. I'm going to take advantage of this. I'm the immigrant to the country that wants to fucking embrace the American dream and work hard and make my riches and my fortune and send some money back home or go home myself or build a life here and get a green card. I think they get the opportunity they're presented with and they're grateful for it. I think actually people like Jojo can take it or leave it. It's like, lol, who cares? I'm fucking good at the game anyway. Maybe I'll probably be on a team anyway. If not, fuck it. I'm young. I'm rich. I'm free. Do whatever I want in it. Just go do something else. Play another. Maybe I'll fuck around and go play Valorant. Who even knows at this point in time? So I just think that's a decent point to make anyway, the Kobe amnesty one. Now let's look at some of the other tweets and we'll also analyze some of that. So we have this one by Vulcan. That's an old one. It's just an interesting one because it sort of infers something. So back in May, it says here, Jojopyun put rank 6 Korea in 3 weeks. So this must obviously be when they were doing a Korean boot camp. Then Vulcan replied, who obviously at the time was in, I think he'd have been in FlyQuest at this time. Vulcan would have been in FlyQuest. Oh, this is May though, so actually we'll have to check the date on that. Let me very quickly look that up. Because this might be just before he joined. Obviously, there were former teammates from 2022 in Evil Geniuses, though, weren't they? Let me just look here. Right, he actually joined in May FlyQuest. So there were former teammates at this point in time. And presumably this is part banter. It is in public. He goes, okay, that's cool. But does that mean you will be on time in office now? And then Andrew Barton, who was like the GM of FlyQuest now, but he was like one of the key people, maybe even GM within EG, goes, we all know the answer to this one, sadly. Now, look, they are memeing, but it's one of those jokes where part of the punchline is there's a grain of truth, isn't it? Like, obviously, he is late, even in EG. Now, I'll get to that later. I have heard also he was late, just not 43 times. Then you have Peter Dunn was obviously the coach of Jojopyun in Evil Geniuses. I'll even point this out. I actually think Peter Dunn understands Danny and Jojo on a level none of these others do in LCS because you look how he integrated them into the team. Remember, it went in this order. They brought Danny in 2021 before Jojo. They brought him in and they played a style through Jizuke in mid. That meant that Danny was protected because obviously he was never that great a laner and then could get to the late game and potentially do his carries, especially the next year. Then the next year, when Danny was a little bit more blooded in, first of all, they had Vulcan as the support for him. And then secondly, they played a little bit more with Danny and they protected Jojo a little bit in his laning phase. And I inspired sort of like play the game around what he was doing and made it so he could get through laning phase. And crucially for me, what you essentially did is Inspired could be the brains of the team. So Jojo didn't have to have great late game macro. And then Danny was really good in late game team fights. So if you just got him to that point in time, you protect the laning phase of Jojo, you get Danny through lane, then you get to the late game and you have Inspired and people like Impact in your team. You got a fucking phenomenal core of people, and you've got both Peter Dunne and a Korean coach in Rigby, you've got the right sets of people to work with these players. So Peter Dunne also is a notorious player advocate. He comes out and he says, if you are a player and you are late 5 times, so what I referenced earlier, that's a player discipline issue. Yeah, agreed, it is. If you are a player and you are late 42 times, that's crucially what's in the parentheses here. At least as much. Keyword at least. He didn't say that's your fault. He goes, that's at least as much, if not more, a coaching/management issue. Now, obviously, one problem here is that whole thing of firing Mithy and then bringing in fucking Reaper, but the way that they did it, there's that aspect, right? Obviously, they've been changing staff in and out themselves. They didn't have the initial plan they started with. Then he put, when teams do badly, people always look to scapegoat someone. Remember this. So that's a valid point. He points out there, like, yeah, look, if you're late a few times, that's your fault. Shame on you. If you're late 42 times and I let you get away with it and I didn't actually tangibly punish you, shame on me, right? Didn't I eventually, it's my responsibility that I keep giving you this task when I know you can't do it. Ultimately, this is the point. It's Jojo's fault he's late, but it's Cloud9's responsibility whether Jojo continues to be late and whether that impacts the team. That's the way I would phrase it for Peter Dunne. I think it's a very valid point. And then I also agree that teams will look to scapegoat someone. Because right now, if you're a Cloud9 fan, you're just hating the org, aren't you? Like, we built the super team. In fact, you know what? Fuck Blabber. He was an MVP, did nothing. Fuck Berserker. He used to carry us. Now he's not that good anymore. Fuck Thanatos. I don't know, just being Korean and good, but not working in the team. Who knows on that one? Fuck the coaching staff because Reaper didn't get us to Worlds a second time. Didn't get fired for this one time? Blah, blah, blah. All that. You could do all that jazz. So it's true by saying instead, well, Jojo was probably late 40 plus times. Then it's actually easy at that point to just blame Jojo. It is true. It's easier to remember Jojo was late than to remember C9 fucked up every split and just wasn't a good team and fundamentally had macro issues, draft issues, never looked cohesive, obviously had shot calling problems, never played quite up to par, were always a little bit underwhelmed. Yeah, sure, it's easier to remember Jojo was late. Let's look at some of this other stuff. This random guy here, who knows who he is, just makes a comment about scouting and about how you need to character scout. This is an interesting point I've been making on my talk shows over the years. Not just do they fit your style, do they fit the shot calling, you also have to ask, do they fit the culture? Like, do we have a guy, for example, it could have been the case in terms of Danny, who's actually a bit fragile, needs to be treated really with kid gloves. But a lot of our players are the really hard, almost EU-style grinders like Impact and Inspired and Vulcan, who are like, fuck it, if he dies, metaphorically. Let's just fucking scream and win. We actually want to be in the hard times. Maybe, he's sort of like, I don't know how I'm feeling about that. You could say that aspect. So anyway, Peter Dunne comes in and he goes, literally no one on EG, player, staff, or management has bad thing to say about Jojo. Even Rigby, the Korean coach of the team, on his stream was positive despite the one criticism that everyone is quoting out of context. And Rigby definitely said he wanted to work with Jojo again. This includes me. What's more evidence about his general character? 3 years on EG/EG Academy or 1 year on C9? Interesting. Then we have this now deleted tweet by Rigby, which I'll be able to get into in a second. Because look, what you have here is Alarim, who you remember used to play in like Immortals, Optic, Echo Fox, comes along and he goes, speaking on Jojo and potential toilet issues. That stuff is real and heavily impacts your performance or tardiness. I had Crohn's disease all through my esports career. Your choices are 1, eat normally, have multiple toilet issues throughout the day, or 2, starve yourself. So Alarim's straight up saying, like, he's inferring that Jojo has toilet issues and perhaps himself even has something like Crohn's disease, and that the only options become you just eat normally and you're just going to have loads of toilet issues, which he's inferring would make you potentially late or unable to attend things, or you just have to not eat food. And then when this guy goes, what did the tweet say about toilet issues? He then says, not directly saying it, but if all issues lead to the toilet, I can only think of one problem. And then he posts what's a now deleted tweet by Rigby, the former coach of EG, which I will just say at the outset, I agree with most people. Even though he himself is doing this actually to try and like offset the scapegoating of Jojo as the sole reason Cloud9 failed, and like a totally unprofessional player who's the typical NA player who's lazy and doesn't care about trying really hard and thinks it's cool to just be good in NA and doesn't care about Worlds. To try and offset that, He's basically leaked what I would say, I don't know if he asked Jojo's permission, I doubt it. I would say is actually privileged information. Like, in my opinion, you're actually now leaking potentially like a private health concern that Jojo has gone out of his way to never make public and the org has never made public. So I will say, if this ends up being a factor and Cloud9 was like ignoring this or were negligent, then yeah, it is important. And I certainly hope they get some sort of punishment themselves or there's some pushback. But this is actually an aspect that's quite interesting. He says, how to make him not late, EG version. Now, the EG version, to read between the lines there, implies, I mean, Rigby can speak English, it implies to me that Rigby is telling you, oh, we also had issues with him being late due to the toilet, and here's how, EG version, I dealt with it. That's what I'm taking from this. So it goes, number one, make him use bathroom in the morning after coming to the office. Number two, make him come 1 hour earlier than the rest because he doesn't use bathroom over an hour. Number three, when he misses meeting due to toilet issue, tell him what was decided and say deal with it. Number four, ask for his opinion on the night before meeting because he will be in bathroom. So you notice, right, this wasn't just like one tip. This looks like a set of protocols. Like, I make him use the bathroom in the morning immediately so he doesn't forget. And then, you know what, I even tell him, come early so you can use the bathroom and you'll get it all out your system before you do all this stuff. Then number three, you know what, if you do miss something, I'm going to tell someone, take a note of that. Then I'm going to tell you, here's what you missed. Just deal with it. You weren't here, you weren't part of the convo, but do what we just said here. And you know what, number four, if I know you're having big issues and you're going through a bout of this, tell me actually what you think about A, B, and C tonight, because then tomorrow, if you're in the bathroom, I'll be able to relay to the team what you're doing. That doesn't just sound like a hypothetical, does it? That sounds like he himself has dealt with Jojo having issues where he was in the toilet too much, and that was making him be late and or miss meetings and miss key information. So then he says, this is quite key. Yes, coaches are babysitters sometimes. They certainly don't have to be every time, by the way, and no org is obliged to be a babysitter. If you're the org who just says, I want professionals who turn up on time, it's in my rules, it's in my contracts, that's totally fine. You could all go, yeah, but I would have done this. Oh, but in EG, they would have made time. That's great, that's EG. That's not Cloud9. That's EG footing the bill for that. That's not Cloud9. When Cloud9 foots the bill, they get to decide the rules under their roof, as it were, kid. So, because everyone becomes a child sometimes, I don't give a fuck about being one, as in babysitter, because winning is the primary goal. If I need to babysit, I will. Of course, not all the time, as players are not children all the time. A couple of details there. First of all, when he says, like, coaches are babysitters sometimes, that's also just because of the immaturity, not just the inexperience of the young age, the immaturity of esports players and the fact that they are playing a video game they are good at, not necessarily diligent, disciplined, very experienced, like studying. No, they're just good at the game. Some of them really are essentially gold players who just have way better hands. Some of them really are. I mean, I've just seen players play at the level I thought they were morons personally, but as long as they had the right people doing things around them and they pressed the buttons, they could win the game. Then he's pointing out that he doesn't mind personally, as in he'll go above and beyond and be a babysitter sometimes if he thinks that's what's necessary to win the game. If that gets him the win, he'll do that. That's Rigby's own personal choice, not something Cloud9 or Jack have to care about or Reapered. Then he goes, of course, even then, so he says, I will babysit if I have to, because sometimes people just are like children, basically, and also I want to win. But even he adds in, of course, not all the time, as players are not children all the time. So his point is, you shouldn't have to babysit all the time. So I'll just put this to the people who will complain, like, yeah, but how can it be 43 times, right? By your logic, what's the cutoff? After 10, do you bench him? And then if he comes back after a week and he's turned up all the meetings in the week, if he then misses another 3, do you bench him again? By the way, notice how much of the actual results I'd be giving up if I benched him like that. Then secondly, by this logic, if he's late 43 times, that almost does sound like he's late all the time and that he's a baby and he's being babysat all the time in your world. So now Cloud9 also has to hire or have a coach just devote, half of his brain and energy to just babysitting Jojopyun, the highest paid player in the league, an all LCS pro player, a former MVP and champion, and the guy I'm building my whole team around. I can see why that would be irritating potentially. So there's that aspect. But then also, I thought what was interesting, and we'll get to this in a second, is obviously the implication, which we're trying to offset now, is that he's just late for toilet issues. It's not a work ethic problem. So I thought there's some interesting things we can look at there. Which is if you go into the Reddit thread, where it says about like, it's called former EG Coach Rigby's deleted tweet. It's obviously, you can't even find it by searching now, but if you know what you're doing, you know how to find Reddit threads. This guy here goes, sounds like he might have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, lol. And then Alarim comes in there and he says, this sounds like me. I had Crohn's throughout my entire esports career and had to choose either to sit on the toilet or starve myself so we could practice without interruption. Ended up choosing the latter. That's mental in itself, by the way. In the end, he just chose to just starve himself while playing presumably for Immortals or something. Like, fucking hell, I don't think that's a good thing, mate. If he actually does have a gastrointestinal issue, that shit is no joke. Pun unintended, but it doesn't matter, does it? And definitely impacts performance. I was nearing 120 pounds on Optic due to never eating, basically sacrificing health to scrim, and then he puts in parentheses, teams will get annoyed if you pause for long periods and will eventually just not book scrims with you. Now, that wouldn't be as big an issue for Cloud9, they're one of the only good teams, but I take his point on board. And then someone goes, absolutely horrific, dude. Sorry to hear that. He goes, could be worse. I come to terms with my body, with the body I've been given. These days, I'm a lot healthier than I was when I was playing competitively, so it's gotten better. Very positive about the future too. Gastrotech is getting better and better. Then this guy goes, as someone who also has Crohn's, I always do my ranked blocks before I eat, as I don't want to risk having to run the restroom mid-match. And then Alarim says, my debuting weekend in LCS was versus Echo Fox and FlyQuest. I remember it like it was yesterday. First game went great and we won. Second game, the next day, I felt that feeling you get in your stomach right before the match starts. If you have IBD, he means disease instead of syndrome then presumably, or he could have just typoed the S. You know what I mean? I remember Zabatine, his coach in Immortals, and Optic, by the way, looking at me and asking if I was okay, and I just shook my head, no. Basically, that entire game I was on Mundo, I was having a flare, desperate for the game to end as fast as possible. From then on, I would just go full days without eating on upcoming match days. By the way, that sounds terrible. Like, it's funny that people are going to say that other thing, like, yeah, what about an issue? If I find out a player in my team has to starve himself to be able to practice and play, then he's not a player in my team anymore. Unless he's some really insane guy who sells me on some Kobe Bryant shit of like, this year means everything to me, and I'm willing to give up years of my future and my health because I just want to win that badly. I'd just say, like, it sounds like we can't have Alarim or Jojopyun. Like, I have to have someone who's a worse player but can just turn up and practice and doesn't have this issue. Like, it actually sounds like it's bad for this guy to experience that. Never mind to be on my team and us have to deal with it. Sounds like it's bad for him. Like, how's this a good set of scenarios? Yeah, you make a lot of money, but then again, that's the offset, isn't it? If this guy's willing to put up with that to make a lot of money, can't Jojopyun just turn up on time? I don't know. That's why it's an issue of whether he's actually ill or not. And then if you keep going down, you have loads more. Like this guy goes, what if you really have no other option on stage? Can you call, I mean, as in he's going to shit himself. Can you call an admin to pause? Does the LCS not accommodate for these kind of medical issues? Alarim says, the real issue, you have limited pause time. The problem here obviously is, if you allowed them to pause any time, well, we can't know internally that he's telling the truth. So it would just allow any team with Alarim or Jojo to just have a free pause anytime they feel like it. So that's part of the issue with that thing, obviously. And then they could just pause. Yeah, you can't talk during it, but presumably you could pause and think for a second about the game. They go, it's the flare-up's gone away now, and then do the right macro move after a Baron fight or something. So you can see, unfortunately, why that loophole would be abused. He says, hypothetically, I could say to the ref, if you don't let me leave, I'm going to shit my pants on stage, and they would let me go. But if I had a particularly bad one that took 30 plus minutes, we're headed to losing bans on next game, because if you're late, you forfeit bans, if you don't know, or forfeit the match. These days, I do infusions for my Crohn's, so while it's still very annoying, my health is in general much better since my LCS days. And then someone says about how fucked up it is. And then he says, gastro issues are making pretty big strides over the past 10 years. I'm pretty hopeful that in the next decade or two, you can completely remove the issue from your life instead of just holding it back until something drastic happens. Now, I will say, I'm not sure what they have, whether it's diverticulitis, Crohn's disease, whatever, but there are two very famous Counter-Strike players who had a lot of success while they were going through these issues. There was Get Right from Ninjas in Pajamas, that was in like 2012, 2013 era. He was having these issues while they were winning all those tournaments in NIP, and he even said it was stress-related, so when he was on stage, he would also feel more pressure and more stress, and there'd be more flare-ups. And then Device from Astralis, right in the era when they were winning all those majors and championships, and they were the GOAT lineup, he also had similar issues. It's one of the reasons why why, when they did the Blastralis 2019 era, they made that weird claim of he doesn't want to travel too much like to the Western time zones past 5 hours, because they were pointing out like he has health issues and it affects him, you know. So another interesting detail that people have referenced about Rigby is in this post, which was thoughts after Worlds 2022. So this is after the Danny benching and basically the last time where Rigby's on EG. He gives his thoughts on a whole bunch of different aspects. And if you go all the way down, here are the players, e.g. Danny, Jojopyun. You go down to Jojo, there's this part here. He says, with Jojo, this is about Rigby, he was unsatisfied with the level of practice. Oh no, this is about Jojo. So Jojo was unsatisfied with the level of practice he got in NA, as in he didn't think NA solo queue was good enough, presumably. After meeting some of the best players in the world at MSI, and remember the story, especially from Danny, goes that they were really burned out after MSI. They didn't get a break afterwards. Obviously, all the teams that didn't go to MSI get the break, and then they had to go straight into summer, and that stressed Danny out too much. Apparently, it stressed everyone out too much, because it says here, after meeting some of the best players in the world at MSI, he wasn't motivated with the practice in NA. I tried to convince him otherwise. This is the coach of Jojo, pleading with him for hours. That's a key detail that I think Peter Dunn just skipped over. Pleading with him for hours, bro. Not just like, oh, can you practice, please? Like, no, whatever, it's a couple of times, no big deal. No, he pleaded with him for hours. But he remained unchanged during the entirety of Summer Split. By the way, this is where if I had Peter Dunn right here, I'd say, mate, you're making good points and you're giving good caveats as to why they might have done this, more of the human aspect, the fact that they're young. But actually, you're making a really great case with Jojo now, mate, and fucking Danny, of why you shouldn't just gamble on like 17, 18-year-old inexperienced rookies that have never done it before, aren't battle-tested, haven't been to Worlds, haven't done it under pressure, haven't shown they can handle the grind. You're making a really great case that no matter how good they are and how malleable they are to the coaching staff, actually they have negatives that can't be ignored, which is interesting because it's the Peter Dunns of the world through EG and through the ERL players in Mad Lions, etc., that sort of built this narrative that you just go for the younger up-and-coming talent over the established pro, and you just gamble on him to be the next Caps, the next Double Lift, the next Jojopyun maybe. So I will just say that part's interesting, that both of those like prodigy players you've brought through, not from EG prodigies, I mean prodigy as in like mega talents, have both had certain issues, behavioural, health-wise, in terms of culture fit, being able to handle the grind. It is worth pointing that out, right? I think it's fair to give everyone their shots and everyone can catch their strays in this particular breakdown. And then there's this part where it says, afterwards, after they've failed Worlds, didn't get out the groups, Jojo apologised to me, his coach, saying that he regretted the time he wasted during the middle of the year. So the entire split, the most important split, he wasn't doing it. Now that is significant to me. And by the way, I have confirmed through some other source in one of his teams, as well as this plus the Alarim thing, that he did have some sort of stomach issues. That was the case with Jojo. So that does actually seem to be a factor in it. And I've heard he even had stomach issues, even if he was in the office, they would still affect him there. It wasn't just that he's like back at the apartment or in his hotel. I don't even know if they have a team house now in Cloud9. I don't know how it operates in Cloud9 actually. But whatever, it was the case that he just couldn't be there, couldn't be on time because sometimes he had stomach issues. But that's what we're going to get into. So we'll look at some other stuff. Then there's this inspired meme where it just shows he's both EU but also mastered NA branding. What great trash talk this is. He did like an iMessage post where it goes, what time are you coming? You just post a picture of Jojo, and when they go, what the fuck does that mean? You go, it means I'm not showing up. Right, the joke here, by the way, is actually even harsher than people realise. The joke here isn't, I'm running 5 minutes late. The joke here is, I just won't be here at all, mate. Look, I'm Jojo, so I just won't even be turned up at all. That's already a little bit telling, because why is that sort of like the punchline? Why would that be funny if he always does turn up? But then inspired, because everyone takes it really seriously, has to come out and goes, obviously it's for the memes. Don't let anyone, look at the way this is phrased, don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking Jojo is not hard-working player and also not best native NA mid laner ever. Right, a couple of things there. One, when he goes there, don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking Jojo is not a hard-working player, so nothing to do with him being on time. You could be really hard-working in solo queue and in scrims and in theory sessions, but you could also be habitually late for all of them. So notice he never disputes the idea he's late all the time. That's a detail I noticed. I'm very good at lateral thinking. I loved Sherlock Holmes stories as a kid. That I noticed people haven't actually inferred from this. Then also, there's this aspect that it goes, and also not best native NA mid laner ever. Right, wait a minute. Maybe people were getting into that and saying, I know Jojo's overrated or washed up. What the fuck does him being the best native NA mid laner have to do with whether or not he's so late that Cloud9, when they get no results, don't want him in their team? Like, because he's the best ever, we just have to put up with that. What a weird implication this is, by the way. Like, you've actually just said a bunch of non-sequiturs that were irrelevant to whether he's late or not. But okay, we get it. Let's look at some other stuff so we can keep going. Kelsey came in. By the way, she used to work in Evil Geniuses, obviously, didn't she, last year? So think about it. She goes, being late doesn't mean that you have no work ethic. Like, I get this. It's because obviously people ain't seen the angle Dom took. They did lean into the angle of bloody NA players just aren't as diligent, are they? Like, this is like another symptom of the problem that ails NA. So, by the way, which is a great abstract point, and even people like Kelsey and Peter Dunn know that, but they're trying to make the case that's not specifically what's going on with Jojopyun, though. So she says, I'm really frustrated by the way people are wording the news leak on Jojo and C9. It is, however, still an issue. This is an interesting point. Still an issue. Regardless of fault, if someone is late 43 times, the working situation is obviously not functioning well. Now, what's weird about that is this. Even her post, because she's never mentioning illness either. Her and Peter Dunn are trying to be pros like that. I think the most interesting detail here is that she's herself even suggesting it could have happened. And she even herself gets that if you're late all the time, well, here's the problem. If it's just that you're late because of a stomach issue, why would that make the whole thing functionally not work? Why would that make it not a working situation that's functional? You're only late a minute or two late, but that's because you had a stomach issue. You get back into the games, everything goes great. I think she gets that there's obviously bigger issues within Cloud9. This random idiot goes, consistent punctuality, shows respect, strive for accountability, not excuses. She even just says, I don't disagree with this. This person goes, time management is work ethic. By the way, sort of a little bit disingenuous there, but I get the premise, the gist of what you're trying to say. It's how to keep a job 101. Now, if there's a reason he is always late, i.e. chronic illness or some sort of thing, that's different and that should be understood ahead of time. But if he's just late without a reason, that's lazy. She then says, there are a million reasons you can be late without being lazy, just like there are a million ways you can put in work outside of normal hours. Right? She is right there. You can still be really diligent without being on time. But I would just say, if you're late 40 plus times, and this is the other problem, maybe sometimes it's a stomach issue. Maybe that became an excuse to be late whenever he felt like it. Maybe it's both. Maybe he didn't perform to the level expected, didn't function within Cloud9 the way expected, didn't turn up on time, and was lazy and used it as an excuse, even when it wasn't the excuse. Couldn't it be all of this at once? But no. As usual, this is a soap opera, and we're all picking either, we're people who don't like Cloud9, and we're saying, fuck Cloud9, or we're people who used to be in Cloud9 and didn't like how we got kicked out, and we're like, fuck Cloud9, or we're going like, wait a minute, so this is why Cloud9 failed. Fuck Jojopyun, he is lazy and everything wrong with NA players. Everyone's just waiting and picking their scapegoat. Like, even though they're sort of walking it back, on some level, Peter Dunn and Kelsey are sort of scapegoating. They're just scapegoating the org over Jojo and sort of trying to make the case it's their issue more than it's just Jojo's. And it's inferred they don't think it's fair how he was fired or is going to be removed, I think, because they're former coaches of his. That'll be a factor. Don't know if that's it. I think they're pretty fair people in general. This guy goes, it very much reads as a classic traditional sports talk show talking point. Are the perceived headaches worth the talent? Antonio Brown immediately comes out. Excellent example, by the way. I mean, notice how the teams that let Antonio Brown fuck around, well, I'll tell you what, the Box actually won a ring doing that. If they'd have actually benched him, would they have won that ring? I don't think so. So I actually think them letting him fuck around and be a dickhead probably won them a ring. Meanwhile, Belichick and the Patriots, even though he scored that touchdown at the very beginning and they managed to trade for him, almost immediately benched this guy and wouldn't use him. And by the way, could potentially have cost themselves a ring by doing so. So I do think that aspect's interesting. Obviously, the fucking Steelers themselves caught this fucking guy, even though he was like actually going to put... If this guy had stuck with the Steelers, not only would they still have had a chance at the end to maybe nick a ring on the way out with that amazing defense, but more importantly, this guy would have been like a guy with a fucking statue outside their stadium. So actually, you saw all the different angles there. One fired him, one benched him, one played him. Which one got to win a ring? The one that just played him and ignored all the issues. So this is why it's so tricky. Because I think when you ignore the issues or you say, who cares? I'm like Rigby, I just care about winning. Well, if you then win as you just pointed out, that somewhat justifies it because you're saying that's your guiding philosophy. The problem, and this is what people don't want to face, is what if you ignore it, like maybe Cloud9 did, and just count how many times he's late, but hope you win the split and go to Worlds, and then you don't win the split and you don't go to Worlds. Eventually, something's going to have to be done about that, isn't it? And that's not going to be cool anymore. And so everyone doing that thing of like, yeah, but if you'd have won the split and gone to Worlds, I bet you wouldn't have benched him. Well, yeah, no shit, because you'd be getting what you wanted, and it would actually prove that being late wasn't a big deal. By the way, even if being late isn't the reason they didn't play well and didn't play in a top-notch manner, it's just such an obvious one, and it's documented, that it's a great official reason to fire you anyway, isn't it? It's just a very good reason to fire you. So, I don't know why Kelsey makes this point. She goes, the fact he would not have gotten fired if they had made Worlds is obvious, so yes. So she agrees with me from before. But if you don't get the results you want, you start quibbling about contract/expectations. It is normal. That's also a very fair point. Obviously, the first thing you're going to do is resize the expectations. This person goes, no, it means you have poor work ethics. Maybe where you're from, this is norm, but it's not in most civilized civilizations. That's redundant to say civilized civilizations, mate. Obviously, if he's suffering from medical issues, it's a different story, but I seriously doubt an org operating out of California would attempt that. I also think it's actually really messed up right now. Like, we don't have the stuff I was getting about EG behind the scenes of knowing people knew this guy had problems, were ignoring it or saying it's not an issue, or even actually taking him away and coercing him into still playing. I think it's really uncharitable that people are just assuming Jack and Cloud9 don't give a fuck about his medical issues and potentially pretending they didn't know about it to fire him and just absolutely scapegoat him and drag him over the coals. I don't think that's fair in light of the way that Jack's behaved to other people in history. We'll get to that on the LS one, obviously. This guy goes, you'd be very surprised by how terrible some esports orgs are in terms of maturity then. Well, isn't that rich, Kelsey Moser? Yeah, I would be surprised by how Evil Genius's org was terrible behind the scenes, but you've never, ever publicly addressed that in any context. You didn't do it while you worked there. You don't do it now while you no longer work there. You've never done that. You have never come out and said any of the things that went on in EG that you witnessed or you know about, or that some of the terrible things they did to players or around players. So I would just say this: shut the fuck up, talk about other orgs and other people's players then. Who are you to call them out? How does that work? What, you won't tell the truth about what happened to you, but you can call other orgs out? Nah. Not fucking with that. And I'll tell you what, by the way, I'll take Cloud9 and the way they treat people over fucking EG. I know from CS and League. But you're just going to keep carrying water for them and their wonderful CEO who had to change her fucking surname so she could, like, rewrite her whole SEO because of what a shit she was and what an idiot she was. I worked with Jojo. I worked 2 years with Jojo, and he doesn't have poor work ethic. But go off. We'll get to that in a minute. Here's another good one. I don't know, man. If I'm late, I'm fired. So I don't know what you would live in, what world you live in, but people get fired after one. This isn't school anymore. She herself goes, did I say being late wasn't a reason to fire someone? But remember, she presumably knows if Jojo has stomach issues. And if it's stomach issues and just going to the toilet and physically being unable to be in the room on time without shitting your pants on the floor, then surely she would mention, but there's external, there's sort of like external factors, or there's reasons as to why actually he can be late. But she herself sort of agreeing that, yeah, maybe that is a reason to fire someone, which is a bit weird to me if people want to play just the health angle personally. Just speculating on that one. This is an interesting one though. By the way, I'll reveal some of my info towards the end. I want to catalogue all this shit first. So LS came out. Now immediately, disclaimer, just like EG, Peter Dunn was the coach of EG when Jojo was there. Kelsey Moser was the coach of EG when Jojo was there. LS worked in Cloud9 for one split, was fired after 4 BO1s, and then had his whole contract like cancelled or whatever the fuck, and had to go back to Korea. So LS is not some sort of impartial, independent observer. He has an obvious reason to potentially have an axe to grind against Cloud9. And I'll just throw this out there before I get into it. Bearing in mind, based on what I heard, LS is one of the people who caused one of the plates of shit that Jack ate and never ever called him out publicly or leaked to other people about what he did. I mean, some people were told, but it was never leaked, some of the things that went on. I think it's crazy that Ellis himself is the one poking the bear here. Like, bro, just the things I know alone. Like, you know what, bro? If you want me and you can come on a stream and I'll tell you the things I heard from Jack publicly on your stream, and you can tell me how they're all wrong and all lies, right? And actually, those stories of when you were late or when you weren't there or what you were doing or what demands you made or what sort of ways you flouted conventions of Cloud9 or ignored the protocols, we can talk about all that. And if you don't find it embarrassing, you can just shut it all down and say it's all nonsense. I think personally, you don't want to awaken that sleeper. So I would just say leave this one. Let sleeping dogs lie. But okay, he says, have a lot of thoughts on the Jojo news, but much like Dom also said in his video, due to not knowing a lot of other stuff, I'm not even sure how to comment. I do think the reason is a farce. Now, what's weird is when they say it's a farce, they're implying that like that reason wasn't really a big deal. Like, you're just saying it is now after the fact as an excuse, but that's not a massive deal. I think it is personally. I think even if you'd have won LCS and gone to Worlds, it's a big deal that the guy's always late. Now, if that's because of health issues, that's a big deal in itself. Maybe I can't have an unhealthy player in my team, or it's not worth it. And then also, do all the players know he's unhealthy? Is health the only reason? Is he ever lying about it? We're not even getting into the details because everyone's just picking one side's telling the truth and one side's lying. And the one side I like must be the good ones that aren't to blame at all. And the ones that I don't like are to blame for everything. So we're all just scapegoating this story. We're not looking for nuance, are we? Then he goes, and that it's only brought up due to missing Worlds. Well, no shit, Professor. Yeah, I wonder why they're bringing up that he was late a billion times when they also got checks notes, none of the results they needed to justify the really expensive roster. You've explained it yourself there, bro. What are you talking about? That would be like me saying to you that like, oh, my date was late and then she was rude. And at the end, she even like tried to like steal $1 from the fucking waiter's tip. But then you know what? Like, I won't complain though, because she did have sex with me at the end of the night. It's like, well, yeah, you got something you wanted out of it. Now, if at the end of all that, she also just went, you know what, I don't think I was feeling the connection with you, and I'd just like to go home now, and please don't call me again. Maybe then you would complain to your friend. You know what, she was fucking late. She like didn't even like actually like show appreciation for the food or gratitude, and then she tried to steal money from the waiter. But hey, bro, you wouldn't have mentioned that if you were now dating her and you'd fucked it. Well, yeah, no shit. You're not even making a point about hypocrisy there, bro. You're just making a point about human nature and who got what they wanted and who was left unfulfilled. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? Also, by the way, when you say that one there, that would even be a great argument for Jojo, wouldn't it? If he actually did win LCS and went to Worlds, and then he went, yeah, I was late, but I did win LCS and went to Worlds. Wouldn't Jack sort of go, you are right there. Look, it doesn't fit my systems, but you are right. By the way, before everyone spirals, because they're an LS fan, I'm LS's friend, about the whole systems thing. Systems didn't really mean they have some super advanced secret source no one knows about. To me, systems was a way of explicitly saying, doesn't matter how much LS knows about League or what a giant name superstar coach he is, an influencer and figure, no one's bigger than Cloud9 the org. And when I bring people in, I bring them in to behave a certain way. That is my philosophy on how to compete and succeed in esports. And I expect you to follow these guidelines. And so the systems are a set of protocols like working out, being at the office on time, maybe, I don't know, doing like group sessions together, maybe there's theory sessions, I don't know what they are, but you get, that's what it was implied. You never pretend it was some secret shit that made you win no matter what, even if you have Max Waldo instead of LS. Like, I think people have gone too far the other way on that one to make it stupider. So systems to me is a totally valid way of pointing out we're not just an org that just fly by the seat of our pants from one coach to wherever he feels like on the day. We actually want a certain standard within our sports franchise, as it were. So more news will come out come probably in next week or so. The avalanche across regions is just starting. As I said on my stream that day, I was told from one of the most reliable of sources that something was already happening within approximately 10 minutes of them getting eliminated. Right, what we'll do now is just look at some of the other things. And then after that, I will get into some of the other things, like some of the info I'd heard. So this one here, I think, is the worst of all the tweets. Far and away the worst for my money. This is a guy, it's called Shadow, aka Razvan, who says former LCS champion coach. LCS champion. So we're assuming this guy must have been in, let me just look. I'm assuming he was in EG maybe, since they're LCS champions, right? We're going to look it up though. So yes, he was in Evil Geniuses during the time they won the Spring Split of 2022, which is when Jojo was there. What was his role? Let's have a look. And he was working with Kelsey as a coach. See, it doesn't list him on here, but I'm going to guess that's because he's like a strategic coach or something. Oh, he was a top lane positional coach. So he wasn't even the mid lane coach, by the way. He was a top lane positional coach at the time that Jojopyun won with EG. This guy, I think some of this is just non sequitur, so we'll read it. He goes, we are talking about a guy who won MVP of the split while being under my guidance, right? Already, that's mental, because even though I know what you mean by that, that makes it sound like when I'm coaching him, he's an MVP. But when you coach him, there's a bit of that hinted there, mate. He goes, and nearly carried a team which was predicted to finish 8th to a top 3 finish. That's obviously the spring last year when they had that super budget roster. Summer last year, sorry, when they had the super budget roster under Kelsey Moser, to top 3 finish, because obviously they were a top 2 team for a bunch of the split, or even a championship since we were first for some time. Jojopyun, capital letters, does not have a terrible work ethic. I've seen this guy study more League of Legends than most players and even coaches. Pause. Not when he was in Cloud9 though, right? Am I wrong on that? Isn't it inferred by what you're saying that it's only when Jojopyun was under your care and in your org that you know that he has a great work ethic and that he studies more League of Legends than most players and coaches, right? Is it not possible for someone to be thin at some point in their life and then years later to be fat? Now, if when they got fat, someone said, you have terrible eating habits. Someone from when you were thin came along and said, no, he doesn't. He has excellent eating habits. When he was with me, he only ever ate salads and low-carb meals. He worked out 3 times a week and he kept his body fat to this exact amount. So you're lying and he's actually a very healthy person. It's like, it's a different situation now and you're not around. So how do you know? So there's that part. And you can already see that is what this whole post is riddled with. The logic is, because I know other things about him from another point in time, what you're saying can't be true. So he goes, during my time as a head coach in LCS, was this guy ever a head coach in LCS? Wasn't he like an assistant coach to Kelsey or something? Let me see here. Head of competitive development. He was actually listed as the head coach. Maybe Kelsey was the strategic coach and the drafting coach. So maybe that was the logic. And by the way, brother, you were only the head coach as far as I know because Esports winter hit and people like Peter Dunn didn't want to work in scumfuck orgs that treat Danny how they did. Like, you weren't some first choice. Let's be real. It's okay. During my time as head coach, the only time you were head coach, basically, we had sessions where the player would bring educative, it's educational, but okay, educative VODs and ruffles. I don't even know what ruffles means, but we're going to assume something similar, like, I don't even know for that one, and explain a concept that they want the rest of the team to learn and focus on. Jojo had by far some of the best VODs, some of the best explanations, and also a lot of overall effort put into it. He always asked questions and wanted to figure out the logic behind something instead of just being a yes man. We are talking about a player who would ask me what matchups were likely for him to play the next week and practicing them repeatedly until late at night, studying every possible resource he can find. Yeah, but first of all, that was at the beginning of his LCS career. 2, that was under Peter Dunn and his system, and then later under you and Kelsey. And then 3, that's not when he was in Cloud9, later after already being a champion and an MVP and all the rest of it, right? So are we going to ignore that, like, people can change or people can behave differently in different circumstances? Okay. We are talking about a player. Who's this guy? Chris Collinsworth. Now, here's a guy who's going to keep bringing all the fucking VODs to the game, and he really knows how to win this game. Like, what's this, like, fucking setup? We're talking about a player who would stay with me for hours when we didn't see eye to eye to try to find the middle ground, which, after reflecting, always ended up being the best solution. Now, before I get to the end, you want to know something interesting here, guys? Notice he doesn't mention a single thing about toilet issues or bathroom breaks or the idea he's ever late. He actually doesn't mention being late. He just, again, they take this conflation that some people are saying, this means Jojo has a bad work ethic. And you're going, you're saying Jojo failed in Cloud9, wasn't actually like a dedicated enough player, has a bad work ethic, was late constantly, and like didn't do what we asked him to do. But he's not a guy with bad work ethic. It's like the old joke. I've never heard the joke where someone goes, you're fucking racist, sexist, ugly, and you're a broke bitch. And you go, hey, broke? I've got money. Like, you get the gag. You're inferring that the rest of it's not a problem, that you're not outraged that the rest of it's true. You just think that's the one problem. So why is there no mention of any of the not being late here for people who are trying to defend him? It's just people defending the idea he had no work ethic, by the way. Because obviously the problem here is this guy, who's just some random guy as far as I know, just a fucking random guy, innit? He just tweeted, Jojo fired due to terrible work ethic. Now, that's his words, by the way. That's what he says, terrible work ethic. Then this guy does that. I think this is mental. This is an example of a guy that, like, his brain was broken by the US government and all the governments around the world that want censorship. He goes, please, capital, stop spreading misinformation and learn to use proper words. Right. So even though this guy, we have no information based on this, that he knows what went on in Cloud9, you're not allowed to tell stories of what happened in Cloud9 if it's different from what happened with Jojo in EG when this guy was there. And not only should you not say that, it's misinformation. By saying what Jojo did in Cloud9, you're misinforming them about who he is in Cloud9 because of who he was differently in EG. That's not misinformation, idiot. And then you have the gall to say, and learn to use proper words. You aren't using proper words. You're abusing a term misinformation in a way that's actually factually not correct. It's nonsense. This is called sophistry. You yourself are spreading misinformation. You're saying because Jojo was like this in EG in past years, he could never be like that in Cloud9. And if you say otherwise and have a different experience than me, you're actually maliciously spreading the wrong information. That's even implied, by the way. You should maybe even be banned off social media, have your post removed, censored, or you can maybe even have legal action against you because you're misinforming and potentially defaming people, right? And then you learn to use proper. In other words, you know what this really means? It's a more complicated version of what Peter Dunn and Kelsey were saying. What they're saying is, I know Jojo, so listen to me. But instead he goes, learn to use proper words. In other words, just only use my words. My Jojo, my Arrakis, my work ethic, my 7-hour shit session after a 5-hour energy. Obviously, I only use gamer subs. Code Thorin, Thorin for 10% off. Does actually make me go to the toilet in the morning, but I just use one in the morning way before the stream, a bit like a Rigby. I know to bring myself in an hour early, have some food, have the caffeine, get my whole system working out, then I get to come and stream and I don't feel the whole time like Alarim on stage, like, bloody hell, this Mundo game. It's bad enough playing fucking Mundo, but I want to shit myself. So there is that aspect. Brilliant. I actually appreciate that this person, even though they're a massive homer, they also did some art for me of NA players, actually has the smarts to just point out it is a different team with different circumstances and people aren't static. Now, here's what's mad about all these coaches doing this, by the way. Imagine Jojo was one of the players, you get this all the time with Kelsey and Peter Dunn, who was shit under them, like had issues on stage, wasn't a very good player, maybe even failed, inted. If then 2 years later they became amazing and mega, and you said, oh, now they're completely different, they wouldn't come out and go, hey, stop saying he's good. Under me, he was shit and inted and didn't ever make it. Somehow they allow change if it's positive. You're just not ever allowed to change for the worse. It's weird how that works, isn't it? And apparently if you're Jack, you should just do everything the way EG did, because I don't know, EG won one split ever. Oh, okay. I don't want to break this to you guys, because it might blow your fucking minds. Do you know how many splits EG's won since that first one with Jojo and Danny? 0. They just won that one. Do you know how many splits Cloud9's won since then? Well, they won the summer split that year. There's one. Then they won what? The first split of the next year with Eminez. There's 2. So they've won 2 since then, and you've won 0. Your system doesn't even categorically necessarily work. Like, you can't compare EG to like the Patriots and Belichick, who had an insane. They had like 2 dynasties or 2.5 dynasties if you look at the different player rosters they had, like a defensive one and an offensive one. Now let's get to some interesting info though. First of all, I just want to put it out there to reiterate for the millionth time. I agree with the sentiment that it's possible someone was a hard worker one area and not as hard at another, that someone could be late and be a hard worker, that someone could be late and not a hard worker, that they could have been someone who was late but had good reason to occasionally in one team, that they're late way more else times, sometimes for good reason, sometimes for not good reason. It could be Jojo's fault, but also Cloud9's responsibility. Therefore, Jojo's fault, but also a coach's fault. But also Jojo's fault, a coach's fault, and a coach's responsibility, and Jack's responsibility, even if it's not his fault. I agree that all those things could be there. It could be a multifaceted situation with all sorts of Rashomon-esque qualities to it, couldn't it? Or I guess in the modern day, you could watch that film, The Last Duel, if you can't handle Japanese cinema with subtitles. So now I will give you some info I got by reaching out to my source network. So first of all, I heard that he was late in Evil Geniuses, but nowhere close to this many times, and it wasn't a massive deal. Like, I basically heard when he would be late, they had simple punishments. They would just give him a warning, or they tell me you have to wash the dishes for your teammate or something. Just some basic thing to show we don't accept this. You have to have a punishment for it, and you have to do something to sort of make it up to your team. I've also heard he did have issues with structure in Evil Geniuses, but he's a guy who they were willing to forgive it because he was young. He put in a lot of effort. He had the desire to win. Now, the issue about him not practicing in summer 2022, I've heard, is because they didn't get a break after MSI and they were burned out, including Danny, who famously begged to not play the split and wanted to already be benched at that point in time, as I pointed out in my video and Rich Lewis pointed out in his reporting. Also, I did hear that in that summer split, you also have to understand that EG was shit-stomping scrims, and literally they were winning so easily, it wasn't a big deal, he wasn't practicing as much in solo queue, and also that they were winning scrims so hard, people used to even just cancel scrims each day. So it just wasn't that big a deal at the time in EG. They were sort of willing to accept it. And I'm assuming the Rigbys of the world were just babysitting him when they had to and get him to come in an hour early and go to the toilet and all that jazz. But when Rigby says all that stuff like come in an hour early, Checky has done that, ask his opinion the night before, that is babysitting. You are having to put in way more effort to handle this guy than you are some of the other people in the team, including, by the way, actual imports and foreigners and people who don't even speak English as their first language. This guy is fucking from NA. So I've also heard, quite frankly, that the reason why EG thinks their system works is because after Worlds, when he got his break in the off-season, he was able to fully reset, go into the next year, and the next year he was the MVP of the league. So to them, they think that they sort of know how to deal with him. They know how to sort of like tame that Mustang while still keeping the skills and the spirit that you want from the Mustang, right? Without breaking it completely. Also then, when I looked into the Cloud9 side, I've heard that Cloud9 is way stricter in terms of their structure. Like, they are a team where you have to like be in the office by 9 a.m. and you have to do X, Y, and Z on time and in a certain manner. By the way, off time is strictly controlled. It actually reminds me a bit of TSM back in the day in that sense, unlike other teams where your off time's your off time. And then I've also just heard that in that team, you could sort of see this on stage, to be fair, and sort of get this vibe from interviews, no matter what people say. If you read between the lines and you were paying attention, there clearly was a lack of camaraderie in that team. They weren't the team that either were like best friends or really loving the vibe of playing together and getting off on how good they all were. You could almost see from the stage games that they clearly did have like a lack of confidence from how scrims were going or how they were practicing all their macro understanding or what to do in the game. And that actually, it only looked worse and worse as the months went on for me. I've also heard that the reason why people are somewhat skeptical about the way this has now come out magically via a leak from an enormous league streamer right at a time when it might help the guys from Cloud9. Now, one, I will say it, technically, a part people did ignore about this story is this actually makes it harder to sell Jojo because logically you now know Cloud9 doesn't want him and has leaked info that means he probably wouldn't want to play for them. Secondly, it is inferred maybe within the team there was bigger issues. And then thirdly, you've also just leaked a massive red flag for him joining another team. They now know this could happen to them. So actually that would lower his value. So you can say Jack leaked it because he wanted to, I'm speculating, because he wanted to someone to scapegoat Jojo instead of Cloud9 or him, but it actually might have cost him money. And by the way, if he needs more money for next year and the stipend's going down, this is a negative thing. Surely you should sell him first. Then once he's sold, wait until all the paperwork's done. Then have magically Dom or someone come out and say, you know, he wasn't even bloody turning up on time. And then people go, oh, well, I'm glad you sold him now, but well done getting that big offer. Because I've heard he's already been offered to certain LEC orgs. By the way, that would be hype as fuck for 2025. If not only an NA talent, I always wanted like Dardoch or Doublelift to do it, but more importantly, a former MVP and champion of LCS comes over to LEC, that would be spicy as fuck. If you don't know, we've never really had that in the LEC. Like, yeah, we've had Ignar come over who sort of fits like the champion part, but he already started in the LEC before he went to LCS. So the idea like an actual native NA talent comes would be crazy. I think it would be mega hype, wouldn't it? Who the fuck wouldn't like to see this guy play Humanoid and Larson and fucking Niski and Caps every week? It'd be baller, wouldn't it? So that part's interesting. And also notice that Jack's actually doing the smart thing there of do what actually Rogue and G2 have done in LEC. You sell to the equivalent of the opposite conference in the NBA or the NFL. So in this scenario, you sell to the LCS if you're an LEC, so you don't sell to your rival and then they beat your ass with Hans Sama. Or if you're in this case, you're Jack, you're smart, you sell him to the LEC, so then you maybe have to see him at Worlds, but he doesn't then go to like a fly quest and then fucking dumps to you with Inspired and just run the table on you, make you look like a fool and make you think, shit, maybe I'd put up with him being late at this point in time. So let me think. Oh, another thing, I'll also say I had it confirmed that he was actually having some of these issues in the Mythy era of Cloud9. I've heard he just used to get fined there and that they were kind of chill about it and they were like, whatever. Like, I've heard someone basically say, this is why I don't believe it's just about IBS. Like, I don't think it's just that. I think IBS might sometimes be it, and that it gives him a very convenient, potentially very real excuse that he can play to, and you can't get inside his brain and know whether he's feeling that. So you just have to sort of put up with it. And if he says he's ill, he's ill. So I noticed they didn't go out of their way to say it, but it's because he had IBS all the time. They told me they thought the reason why he was late so much is he was willing to accept the fine and that he just wanted to get more sleep when they did like the forced workout that you apparently have to do in Cloud9. So I don't know. I'm hearing conflicting stories all across, publicly, privately. Like, it doesn't seem as simple to me as like this guy just has IBS and Cloud9 are dicks and are just scapegoating him. To me, it's like a little bit of everything. And then if I look totally at Cloud9, it makes a lot of sense as to why this has gone this way. Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadjou, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.